So I was listening to an NPR podcast called Hidden Brain. And the main question the host presented was the following. If you meet your younger self today, would he or she recognize you? I will come back to that question later. When I was 12 years old, I broke my wrist trying to dunk a basketball. I was playing at the neighborhood court, and in a moment of pure overconfidence, I grabbed the rim, slipped, and landed badly. I knew something was wrong. The pain shot up my arm like fire, but I didn't say a word. That night, I went home and kept my arm close to my body, hiding the swelling. The reason? The next day, my dad was taking me to see a game. Not just any game, my favorite team. I had dreamed of this moment for years. I was terrified that if I told him about my wrist, take me to a doctor instead of to the arena. So I didn't want an hospital. I wanted a game. Next morning, my dad said, such a nuts days, let's take the long way and walk to the stadium. It's good. It was nearly 2 miles. With every step, my wrist ached. He noticed me cradling and asked, what's wrong with your hand? Nothing, I said, just a little sore from practice. We go to the stadium, and the game was everything I had hoped for. I cheered until my throat was raw, completely lost in the magic of it all. The crowd, the energy, the sound of the ball hitting the net, it was perfect. After the final whistle blew, I finally turned to my dad and say, I think my wrist might be broken. An hour later, I was sitting in a hospital, my arm being wrapped in a cast, 3 weeks of no basketball, but I didn't care. I had seen the game. I tell you this story today because all these years later, I don't really watch basketball anymore. Life has taken me in a different direction. My passions have shifted. Today I find my experience elsewhere in a different world entirely. I'm sure that my 12-year-old self wouldn't just be confused. He would see it as a betrayal. Now, you might say, that's not a great example. We all change from time since we are 12. So here comes another experience. When I was 18, I was absolutely certain about my future. I was going to be a lawyer. I imagined the courtroom, the cases I will argue, the justice I will fight for. It wasn't just a career choice. It was my identity. I had no idea that years later, I wouldn't be standing before a judge, but before a congregation. That instead of arguing legal cases, I would teach in Torah. That instead of interpreting the law of the land, I will be exploring the wisdom of Jewish tradition. At the age of 18, I couldn't have imagined this path. Not because I lacked vision, but because my future wasn't just unknown, it was unknowable. I ask you one more time. If you meet your younger self today, would she or he recognize you? This is the question. If our future selves might look nothing like who we are today, what is that truly that defines us? This is the point. When we look backwards, we can see enormous changes in who we have become. But when we look forwards, we tend to imagine that we are going to be the same people in the future. Obviously, we imagine the world is going to be different. We know that AI and climate change, we are going to create a very different world. But we don't imagine that we ourselves, we have different perspectives, different views, different preferences. In the future, this is called the illusion of continuity. When we look backwards, the contrast with our prior selves to who we are today is clear. When we look forward, we can imagine ourselves being a little older, a little grayer, but we don't imagine fundamentally that we are going to have a different outlook or perspective, that we are going to be different people. The podcast brings this real example. John and Stephanie got married. He was 22, she was 19. John became a high school coach and Stephanie became a nurse. Many of the patients she saw were very sick. They had terminal illnesses, very low quality of life. And when Stephanie came home from this visit, she was often shaken. And she will tell John, if I ever get a terminal illness, please do nothing to prolong my suffering. I care more about quality of life than quantity of life. In a more dramatic moment, she will say, John, if ever I get that sick, just shoot me. And John would look lovingly at his wife, his healthy wife, and he would say, okay, Steph, I got you. Fast forward a couple of decades, in her late 50s, Stephanie is diagnosed with a terrible illness. Stephanie, being Stephanie, decided to extract as much as joy and pleasure from life as she can. She spends time with friends and family. But there comes a day when Stephanie, in fact, is no longer able to breathe. She's grasping for air, and John takes her to the hospital. And a nurse at the hospital asks, Stephanie, would you like us to put you on a ventilator? And Stephanie says, yes. John is astonished. They have been discussing this conversation for 30 years. Surely that's not what Stephanie wants. He doesn't say anything. The next morning, he says, Steph, when the nurse asked you yesterday if you wanted to go on a ventilator and you say yes, is that really what you wanted? And she says, yes. This is what happened. Stephanie, at the age of 39, as she was healthy and no idea of Stephanie at age 59, gasping for air, would really want. For the older Stephanie, her younger self might as well have been a stranger. A stranger who was trying to make life and death decision for her. Our cells turn over all the time. The people you were 10 years ago are not the people you are today. Biologically, you have become a different person. But I believe something much more profound happens on a psychological level. The famous plasticity of the brain that we all heard so much about means that on an ongoing basis, you are constantly becoming a new person. This has profound consequences for so many aspects of our lives. You know, I have had the illusion that the 18 years old who wanted to be a lawyer and the 40-year-old rabbi that moved from Argentina with 5 kids to Miami 23 years ago, and the 60-year-old me, that these are all the same person. But I'm not. So if you, like me, accept the idea that you are going to be a different person in 5, 10, 15, 30 years' time, you should play an active role crafting the person you are going to become. You should be the curator of your future self. You should be the architect of your future self. But what does that mean? Expand your horizon, because you're going to become someone different. You might as well be in charge of deciding who that person is going to be. So how do we prepare ourselves for those future changes? The first piece of advice is to stay curious. To be curious means to embrace the unknown with wonder instead of fear. It means asking questions not just to confirm what we already believe, but to discover what we never considered. Curiosity is the willingness to be wrong, to be surprised, to let go of certainty in exchange of growth. If the child who keeps asking why, when adults have long stopped wondering, is the scholar who studies ancient texts not just for answers, but for the deeper questions they spark. To be curious is to believe that who we are today is not the limit of who we can become. Second, and I think what I will say can really be a good piece of advice for the younger people here. Listen. As we make pronouncements on social media or in political forums or at the dinner parties, let's bear in mind that among the people who might disagree with us are our own future selves. So when we express views with great certitude and confidence, let's remember to add a touch of humility. 3, it's a reality that our future selves are going to be weaker and frailer than we are today. And that's true. That's part of the story. It's only part of the story. Our future selves are also going to have capacities and strengths and wisdom that we do not possess today. So when we confront opportunities and we hesitate, when I tell myself, I don't think I have it in me, or I tell myself, I don't have it in me to learn that new skill, or I tell myself, I don't have it in me to fight that battle, what we really should be saying is, I don't have the capacity to do those things now. That doesn't mean I won't have them tomorrow. So lesson number 3 is to be brave. If the sermon ended here and they ask you, what did the rabbi say? You will live with the option to say he spoke about the idea that everything changes and that it's best to actively prepare for change. But then I opened the beautiful brochure that the family prepared with information about the service, and I read the name of all the family members who perished the Shoah, the ones who survived the Shoah. I listened to the bat mitzvah speech, and I see countless of family, aunts and uncles and cousins lost. And Zana reminding us the special Shabbat, and I realized that from the Torah's days to the Megillah, to the Shoah, and now as we stand in ongoing suffering of October 7th, like the Bat Mitzvah beautifully reminds us, there's one thing that never changes. Never. It's called anti-Semitism. Everything changes, but anti-Semitism. It persists, and in this Shabbat, to remind us of this sad reality, this Shabbat announces the upcoming festival of Purim, when we read Megillat Esther, and it teaches that Haman's hatred of the Jews was not based on any wrongdoing, but on the very existence and distinctiveness. He decreed to destroy, kill, annihilate all the Jews, young and old, infants and women, rings a bell, in one day. Why do we need to remember? Because while everything in the world changes, one thing does not: anti-Semitism. Look at this family. It takes different forms, wears different clothing, and presents itself in different ideologies. It always returns. Pharaoh called us as a demographic threat, and Haman called us disloyal. And Islam calls us infidels, and the church calls us heretics. And Hitler called us radical racial impurity. Today we are accused of every crime, from controlling the world to being colonial invaders. The accusation changed, but the hatred remains the same. And we make the same mistakes each time. We assume that because we have changed, because the world has progressed, this time will be different. We think that if we fight in armies and we win Nobel Prizes, or we contribute to society, the world will see us differently. But as Zana read from the Torah, Amalek is still here. The illusion of continuity makes us believe that our future will be peaceful, that history will not repeat itself. But Jewish history teaches the opposite. It always repeats itself. So what do? A committed Jew who understands that anti-Semitism will never disappear can confront it by strengthening Jewish identity, educating others, and actively standing against hate. Can thank you enough, Ilana, for the role you play in our board of directors, making sure that our kids receive the best we can offer them, and Todd for raising this amazing, incredible Jewish family. This means embracing and living Jewish values proudly, studying Torah, passing on Jewish tradition to future generations. It also involves educating both Jews and non-Jews about Jewish history, culture, and the danger of anti-Semitism, ensuring that misinformation and prejudice are countered with truth. Additionally, engaging in advocacy, supporting organizations that fight anti-Semitism, and building alliances with other communities can create a broader front against hatred. Finally, leading by example, showing resilience, dignity, and ethical behavior can demonstrate the strength and perseverance of the Jewish people in the face of adversity. And yes, there is something even more powerful that never changes, something that has outlasted every empire, every oppressor, every attempt to erase us, the Jewish commitment to life, the sanctity of life. The belief that despite everything, we do not give in to despair. We build, we love, we celebrate, like today, like this morning. 4 generations standing together, living proof that Jewish continuity is not just an idea, it's a reality, a defiant, beautiful, sacred reality. We are here because those before us refuse to let darkness define them. And we stand together today, not just remembering our past, but shaping our future. This is what has never changed, and Zana, I promise, this is what never will. Shabbat Shalom.